We're sitting in Sylvester's dressing room, and it's the second day of January 1990. And the whole theatre is just coming awake. It's the morning, about 11 o'clock. I think we're just becoming awake as well, aren't we, Sylvester?
Well, some of us. I'm not sure if I think I'm still dreaming.
But of course we're doing 2 shows a day as well, which makes a difference.
Yes, it does. That's 12 shows a week, which means that you just become complete slave to the panto.
Because you're a slave.
That nicely around to my role, because I'm playing a slave. The slave of the lamp. Normally it's the genie of the lamp, isn't it? But because of Eartha Kitt's playing the slave of the ring, I think they've changed it for some reason.
Yes, we're doing Aladdin in Manchester Palace. That's where we're sitting at the moment.
On a rainy
Manchester day.
Winter day. But for those of you who don't come from this country, pantomime is a very English, or British, I should say. I'm a Scotsman and I fall into that thing of calling all of Britain England. It's a very British institution, isn't it? Hard to explain.
It is. Eartha Kitt is very keen on it, but she says that they wouldn't know what it was in America. She feels that they might enjoy it, but really, isn't it? How do you start? Come in.
I mean, it's the cleaner. Can I do something now?
Hello. Sorry to disturb you. I think we've left a jar of clean foam. Can I just have a look?
Yes, do.
Clean foam.
Yes.
Clean film. No.
Clean film.
Clean film, clean foam. Sounds like
foam.
a voice
Could go on forever,
exercise. Yes, it's like one of those voice exercises.
Did you find it?
No, it's not here.
Right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
She really just wanted to pop in and find out what we were up to.
That's right, because
she works for the MI5 of the theatre. So
the theatre is a kind of animal, and it is slowly coming to life now, isn't it? The cleaners have been in and made our rooms habitable, and then the actors will be in for the rest of the day.
Slowly coming to life.
Slowly coming to life.
First during the matinee, and then in full bloom in the evening show. Looking forward to that final pint in the pub before they close and home to bed.
It's a delicious moment, isn't it? And sometimes not home to bed.
No, but I do, on 2 shows a day it's very difficult to actually stay up late. I know we went to one party on 42nd Street, which is also one in Manchester, around the corner. I think that I'm still getting over that party, and that was 3 weeks ago.
When we talked about doing this conversation, and I suggested perhaps rather obviously we could call it The Real McCoy, you said, we should call it Not The Real McCoy.
Yes.
Now, why is that?
Well, partly because Sylvester McCoy is not my real name. I have another name. I suppose that's one reason why.
Well, what is your real name?
Percy James Patrick Kent-Smith, which is a bit large to put up in front of theatres. So being a man of great ambition, I decided to shorten it. I didn't shorten it enough. I should have shortened it to Tom Mix or something. Because when you have to sign Sylvester McCoy hundreds of times in an autograph, you think, I wish it was a shorter name I'd chosen.
And you were given that name by your parents, I suppose?
Yes, my mother often apologised to me afterwards.
It's not good enough though, is it?
She said she only called me after my dad. Good old bugger. So that's why she just called me after him. And he came from England, which in England is a very respectable name, but in Scotland that name has many connotations. Percy being partly has 2 connotations. One is that it fits in with the Cyrils of this world, and the other is that the Percys, as anyone who might have read the Shakespeare knows, used to invade Scotland. The Hotspurs, they used to invade Scotland a lot. So the Scots, it was thought not to be a nice name, so we kept that one quiet. But until I was about 9 or 10, I was just plain old Kent Smith, which I was very happy with. My family still call me that today.
Do you mean that Kent was your first name?
Yeah.
So people called you Kent?
They did, yes.
Your parents called you Kent as well?
Yes, well my parents, I was an orphan really. I was brought up by grannies and aunties, and they called me Kent. Because Percy, you couldn't mention it in mixed company in Scotland. And also, I think maybe I was called Kent because a local butcher was called Kent. And it's always very handy to keep in with the butcher.
You got good meat?
Yeah, you get the nice meat.
Did you stay in...
The butcher must have thought I was named after him, so I gave us extra sausage.
Where was this?
Dunoon or Gales, Scotland.
Dunoon. That's
Dunoon's a body between.
it's the Highlands.
It is, by the skin of its teeth.
Yes.
Geologically, it's in the Highlands. In fact, you can go down onto the beach and you can stand in the lowlands geologically and run back into the Highlands. It is also psychologically in a way, because there's a great divide with the River Clyde between it and the lowland or the industrial part of Scotland or the busy part of Scotland. So I'm proud to be a Highlander because it's a beautiful place, the Highlands.
But you lived with not your parents. Your
No, my
parents had
father
died.
was killed during the war. He volunteered when he was 17, pretending he was 18, to join the submarines. I went out and was blown up off Africa. I discovered only recently, since I got Doctor Who, really. I mean, I knew he was killed because, the telegram. We got the telegram saying missing in action. And then later when I got this magnificent role of Doctor Who, someone wrote to me and said, we can't find any Sylvester McCoys, because they'd heard that mentioned, in fact my father was in submarines, they can't find any Sylvester McCoys who were down with submarines. We found a Sylvester, but not a McCoy. And then I wrote back to him, it was Percy James Kent Smith. And he wrote back and said, yes. Sent me a photocopy of a history of submarines and a description of the boat going down. Very interesting that was. And I found out it was African. I looked up the map. And also he mentioned the fact that the captain of the German ship that sank him is still alive and living in this village in Germany. I don't quite know how he told me that. Perhaps just to go and say hello. I'd quite like to have met the man. Maybe I still shall, really.
Yes, there's a possibility, isn't there?
Yeah, because the thing was, it was a war, and my father was just trying to kill as many Germans as the Germans were trying to kill each other. So dreadful experience. I was still in the womb when it happened.
So your father was always a kind of mystical figure, I suppose.
Yes, I was a hero. I was born with a hero, and I used to run around with these medals, playing cowboys. And I lost the medals, or gave them away. My mother met him in Dunoon, which was a haven, really. It was a wild little town during the war, because it's on the Clyde, and if anyone looks at the map, they'll see. It was a safe haven, because the mountains ran behind it. So when the Germans used to come and bomb Glasgow and Clyde Bank and the Clyde itself, because the Clyde was full of naval ships from all over the world, they'd miss Dunoon. They'd fly over the mountains, Dunoon would be gone, and they'd drop the bombs. So also the RAF used to come from the lowlands as well, across. There was my mother and my aunties had a marvellous war. Well, up until my father was blown up.
Yes.
But so they had a great time. And then she met this rather nice Cockney called Percy Kent Smith, and they got married. And then as soon as they came back from the honeymoon, he was sent off in his submarine and she never saw him again.
So she didn't know him for very long.
No, she only knew him for about 6 weeks, I would imagine.
That's just long enough to have you.
Yes. He was a mystery. He had a large English family in London, and I came, the Kent Smiths, and I came to see them chat eventually when I was much older. Try and find out about him, I wanted to find out what he's like. And he seems to have been a saint. I find that a bit hard to believe, but I suppose he would be a saint, really, dying so young. He seemed to be quite a nice chap. There was one nice story about him, was that when the war came to London, and all his sisters and brothers were sent out, as children were, out of London there to stay with various people. He actually cycled, he was a great cyclist, and he cycled all around London, visiting them once a week on his bike so that they wouldn't feel lonely, which I thought was heroic in a very small way.
Yes. And what happened to your mother?
Well, my mother, she didn't quite get over it, I don't think. And about 8 or 9 years later, she had a nervous breakdown. I never got over that. No, she stayed in a mental hospital and died when I was 23, 24. So I was kind of an orphan. Then my grannies and aunties brought me up very merrily. We had a large Irish family, the Sheridans. Sounds like one of those stories that, a good name for a story, for a TV epic, the Sheridans. And they were quite epic people, really. Very theatrical, probably didn't know it. I think that's where I got my theatricality from.
How were they theatrical?
Well, they were very Latin in their Irishness, or very Irish in their Scottishness. They weren't very dour Scots, they were very they used to argue wonderfully for years on time, on end, over little things. But it was epic.
Mm.
And whatever they did was always done in a very big way.
Did you feel you belonged to them?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I felt I was a visitor, really. They were great storytellers and wits. I had an aunt who was a terrible snob, but I loved her dearly. I loved her, she's dead now, but she was a terrible snob, but she was also very witty and very funny. And she used to take me from Dunoon across the water on a boat up by train to Glasgow to have tea in very posh tea rooms in Scotland, designed by, oh gosh, I'm so bad at names. Anyway, she used to take me there and have tea. Very posh it was. And then she'd make me laugh, and I had a very rude laugh. And I would laugh my rude laugh, and then she'd scold me for this, because it wasn't the done thing to laugh rudely.
Yes.
And then she would proceed to crack another joke or witticism and make me laugh again. And I was in tears, and it was in terrible agony because she was very serious about my rude laugh. I mean, she was a terrible snob, didn't want that rude laugh, didn't do that. She was wearing her mink stole, and I was laughing rudely. But it was a great, wonderful agony. And I've never had that agony till years later when I was watching Fawlty Towers. I lived in one room at the time with my newborn son and Agnes, my wonderful wife. And no, we had a kitchen, that's right. But we had the television and my little boy was in his little cot and I was watching it. And I didn't want to wake him up. And I was watching Fawlty Towers, and I was in hysterics, but I couldn't laugh. And so what I had to do is get up, run out of the room, close the door, and roar in the hall, and then go back in to watch some more. And so I relived that wonderful joy of laughing when you're not supposed to. Oh, it's a great, great feeling.
So how old were you when you were sitting in the tea rooms in Glasgow?
Oh gosh, I was 12, 8, 9, I don't know, those ages.
And you were going to school in Dunoon?
Yes, I went to school in Dunoon for a while, but then I come from being a Sheridan. One half of my family were Catholic, the other were Protestant, I suppose. But I was brought up in the Catholic half, and I went to school and we had a headmistress called Rosie O'Grady. But of course, we were immigrants really, the Catholic community in Dunoon, in a very Protestant place, and being immigrants, we were more Irish than the Irish. On St. Patrick's Day, we had so much greenery. Birds would build nests in us and drop things on us. And we had this headmistress, Rosie O'Grady, wonderful name. She had tortured my mother's generation at school. She'd been a terrible disciplinarian. She'd get them to kneel in the corners with their hands outstretched for hours if they'd done anything. By the time I got to her, she'd softened and she was about to retire. And she used to give us vocational talks for when we were about 11. When we were going to leave school, what we would like to be, and she'd bring up a teacher to talk to us about being a teacher. And then afterwards, she'd ask who would like to do that. We'd put our hands up. I put my hand up for everything. The teacher, the postman, the fireman, and the priest. The priest came. But when I put my hand up for the priest, she suddenly took myself and Danny Sweeney and Mary O'Malley, but
Mary O'Malley?
yeah, she was in the...
There was a real Mary O'Malley?
Oh yes, well, we were Danny Sweeney, Sheridan's. We were Irish.
Yes.
But I had this odd name, Passenger Patrick. We don't talk about that. And so she suddenly grabbed us and sent us down to see the priest, except for Mary O'Malley. I couldn't understand at the time why. She wasn't sent out, given a free afternoon off school. But off we went. It didn't dawn on me that we hadn't been sent to see the fireman or, the policeman. But off we went, and we got to the priest's house, and Danny Sweeney lost his bottle, as it were. He didn't want to knock and say, I want to become a priest. And I said, I'll do it. So I knocked on the door and opened the door and said, I want to become a priest. And before I knew it, I was my family were very proud of having produced a priest, or a potential priest, and off I was sent to Aberdeen to become a priest. So I went to school in Aberdeen for a while.
But once you made that choice, or that choice had been extracted from the other choices that you made, did it become more serious for you?
Oh yes, it did actually. Yes, it became very serious, physically very serious. I got housemaid's knee from praying. In fact, I became totally committed to it and enjoyed it immensely. I spent 3 years or 4 years at Blair's College, Aberdeen. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Just down the road from where the Queen has her holiday home.
But this was after you left school.
No, I was 11. I mean, I was...
You went to Blair College when
yes,
you were 11?
Well, 12.
So it's a secondary school?
This was a secondary school. It was a secondary Catholic public school, boarding school. And I loved it. I really did love it. I became very religious. I used to sit at a housemate's knee. I prayed a lot. Used to get stoned by praying a lot, which was trying to concentrate so much on the prayers that I'd float in my head. I mean, I discovered really, what it was that made saints or people, kind of become rather crazy with religion. I left the college to become a monk because I became so religious then, so dedicated to it, that I decided I wanted to become a monk rather than just a lay priest. I wanted to become even more humble, I thought. And so I wrote to the Dominicans and they wrote back very encouraging letters. So I left the seminary. And then they wrote another letter after I'd left and saying that you're a year too young, wait for another year.
You were how old?
I was 16 or 17, and which was the best thing that happened really, because then I had to be educated, and so I was sent to Dunoon Grammar School, which happened to be a mixed sex comprehensive school, and I discovered girls, thank goodness, and gave up all thought of becoming a priest. But it was a few years later, when I lost my religious beliefs, I can see it just as kind of a superstition and kind of a medievalism that was required, in ancient times, but has no real reference or relevance.
How did that come about, though? Was it a gradual realization, gradual drifting away, and then you rationalized it?
It's also a gradual realization that, yes, through reading and things like that, I started to question these brainwashed beliefs as they were. Because, as a child, as soon as you got to school, you were taught religion very, very strongly all the time. And it wasn't so much a rebellion against it, it was just a slow realization that it was all gone, really. It wasn't true. Just impossible. Basic things like, why should, Jesus' son, this man become a God, only come down once? And also, I suppose a lot of it was to do with the fact that my mother had spent a lot of her time in a mental hospital. My mother was a good woman a good, simple woman who hadn't done anything except boot her goose. But why should she suffer? And all this promise of, afterlife, better life. Prove it.
When you were there, you must have had the same thoughts. You must have had to rationalize, this time within the religion, about suffering, the problem of suffering, the problem of your mother.
Oh yes, but then you were heavily, you were enclosed in a building where religion was pumped at you from every which way. Not badly either. It was the happiest 3 years of my childhood, but that was more because of the social thing and being with all these other people, and I enjoyed the harshness of the regime, although it wasn't harsh in a Dickensian sense or Tom Brown's School Days sense. We weren't beaten or anything. It was
austere.
It was austere. I quite enjoyed all that. And the question, because as soon as you uttered a question, there was, an answer from the maths teacher who was a priest, the English teacher, the geography teacher, your religious instructor. There's no area, there's no room.
So you couldn't find out the truth for yourself. You had to.
Well, there was no way. You were shut up in this building for most of the time. I couldn't even. I missed Elvis. I missed the arrival of Elvis. One of the great regrets of my life. I feel slightly lacking in development because I hadn't, as a teenager, I was the right age. Because we weren't allowed to listen to radio or anything like that.
So
I did get classical music, which was.
Were you very quiet and studious?
Oh gosh, no.
Serious and.
No, I wasn't. No, I was a bubbly little merry fellow. I was always laughing, and I wasn't. As far as I remember, I think of that part of my childhood as another character. It's like another. I look back on him, Kent Smith, the trainee pope, as a completely different character from the one I am now. And he seems to me a rather merry, bubbly little fellow, full of enthusiasm, who wasn't prissy in any way, and just committed to what he was doing. I suppose a bit like acting, I think it's similar to what I'm doing now, because I'm really committed to this.
So you've just switched vocations, really?
Yes, although they are very similar.
When you couldn't go on to be a priest for a year, there was a breathing space, and suddenly you started seeing things through things. You saw the world more fully.
Well, I saw one other half of the world more fully.
Which you hadn't discovered
Females.
before. But you'd been brought up in a female environment when you were
As a
young.
child, yes. Oh, yes, with aunties and grannies and the kids. But I mean, during the years. But I discovered it was like just like, you know, as if a dam had burst. You know, I've been held back for a bit in Blaise College, Aberdeen. Suddenly the dam burst and whee! I discovered the wonderful world of women.
And how long were you there?
During grammar school? I can't remember, 2 or 3 years, I suppose. I went until I was 17 or 18, and then I left. I did my highers, my lowers and highers. Then I left to come to London to visit my English half, the Kent Smiths, and just for a little holiday. But I stayed. I went and stayed. I then went to a youth employment office, decided to get a job, and when they discovered I had a double-barreled name and had been to a grammar school, they immediately got on the phone, mightily impressed by these two irrelevant things, and sent me to the City of London, where I became a trainee something or other. It was very interesting. You see, grammar school, Dunoon Grammar School, that was very grand, but in Dunoon, which was in the Highlands, it was the only school for miles. People used to come from the islands and, you know, board and lodge in Dunoon and go to school. Everyone went to Dunoon Grammar School. It wasn't just the grammar school as in the English sense. It was a comprehensive school, I suppose. But because they had that funny name, grammar, it really impressed the people in the City of London. So I went to the City of London and worked there in Fenchurch Street in insurance and reinsurance and Lloyd's underwriting. But I did find it very odd, London. Very odd place, very lonely.
Compared to Dunoon?
Very, yeah, because Dunoon was a quiet little town, which in the summer was a holiday resort, but in the winter was very, very quiet. I'll tell you what interesting phenomena. I came, when it gets dark, when they put the lights out, well, they used to in the streets in Dunoon, because it was very safe late, you know, about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I suppose, and it got very dark, so you could see the sky and the stars, and there wasn't much light. And I came to London, and I was wandering around Soho, this wonderful place of pop music and sin. I was fascinated by all this, and I was kind of romanticising that I was like maybe Toulouse-Lautrec, or one of the great painters who used to mix with the lowlife. And I was wandering around. I mean, I'd only just arrived in London, you know, and I didn't notice it get dark because of the lighting. And I remember it was 11 o'clock at night, and I looked up, just by accident looked up, and saw that it was dark beyond the light. And I was completely amazed by this, because I've never been used to it. Because when in Scotland as well, in the winter, you know, it's kind of it gets very, sometimes it hardly gets light, you know, it's not all night, not quite as far north as that. But, you know, there's a general dusk about the place. I never noticed. Never forgotten that amazement. Gosh, it's night time. Where did the light go? I ended up joining a motor insurance company. Fire Auto Marine, it was called. It was run by a man called Emil Suwundra, who turned out to be one of Britain's very colourful swindlers and crooks. Thank goodness, in a way, for me, not for the poor people that insured their cars with them. But so his company went bust. I was just working for it, and it went bust. And I kind of didn't. I thought that's some fate is taken. I don't want to go. I hated working. I hated this kind of work. Not working. I love work, but I hated insurance. I hated paperwork. Well, then when the company went bust, I took that as an omen to leave. So I did. I left and became a hippie, which was a good time because everyone else was being a hippie, so no one noticed. And then, as luck would have it, I was living in this wonderful madhouse in Hampstead, which was full of bohemians, and one of the there was a hippie there who was a cook at the Roundhouse Theatre in London, and she said, look, they're looking for someone in the box office, they're starting up this theatre. So I was a hippie who would count, and I got the job in the box office, and I started working in theatre, and I enjoyed that immensely. And because of my training in the city, I was good at.
What did you enjoy about it?
Well, I enjoyed the relaxed atmosphere. There was, like in the city, there was one time I remember where it was very hot, and I took my jacket off, and I was told off for taking my jacket off without permission. Because the city, I mean, I'm sure it's not like that now, but in that time it was run like, the British public school system. Stupid, ridiculous, idiotic laws, that they made up just to oppress people, just for the use of petty authority, which I've always hated anyway. I've always had a great hate for authority, a dislike for it. I feel it has to prove itself every day and be found wanting. But I like this very relaxed atmosphere where you could count up and not, you could do what you liked at the same time. You still did a very good job. The job was required and dress code was as you wish.
And you also had this contact with theatre, and you hadn't had that before.
No, not really, no. So I had contact with theatre, and I didn't think of going into it. I just thought that here I had at last found a good career in theatre administration, perhaps eventually.
Mm.
And then there was an actor collecting the tickets that I was selling. He was out of work at the time, and his name was Brian Murphy. Has become very famous, wonderful man he was. And he presumed I was an actor, and I didn't tell him I wasn't. I just thought it was rather nice to be thought of as one of these exotic creatures. And then one day Ken Campbell, director and writer, came in, and someone had let him down. He was setting up a new group called the Ken Campbell Roadshow. And he said to Brian, "Look, I've got this mad show. I need someone to fit in ever so quickly. I've got dates at the end of the week. I'm recommending it." And he said, "Well, that's actually the box office is completely out of his head." So he came up to me and said, "Would I like to join his group?" And I said, "I'm not an actor." I said, "No, it doesn't matter. Come, be an actor." So I went to become an actor. And I met him, I think a week later, that's right. I went up to meet him in Manchester. Funny enough, where we are here. And I got myself a silk scarf, which dangled down, because I thought that's what actors had, they did, silk scarves, and a blazer. I borrowed a blazer from someone, and I arrived at Manchester Station to see Ken Campbell completely covered in denim, looking slightly ridiculous, because he never did look properly dressed. But Ken, or still doesn't really. There's something about him that he hasn't found the style that suits him. But anyway, off we went to a place called Chorley outside Manchester, and it was like Coronation Street, which I'd never been in before, that kind of street. And in this 2 up, 2 down house, there was the Ken Campbell Roadshow, which consisted of Bob Hoskins, Dave Hill, Jane Wood, Ken Campbell, and now myself. And we proceeded to do shows around pubs and clubs in the north of England, and then expanded to theatres and to international acclaim in Germany and Holland and Belgium.
When you joined the Ken Campbell Roadshow, were you still Kent Smith?
Yes, I was. I was Kent Smith for a little while, and then I always felt it was the wrong kind of name for the kind of type of acting that seems to have come out of me. Because Kent Smith is kind of a matinee idol sort of name, square-chinned chap. In fact, there was an American, or still is, an American actor called Kent Smith who became a kind of matinee idol in B-movies. American B-movies. And I never quite thought I was he. So I was always on the lookout for another name. And then eventually Ken devised this show called An Evening with Sylvester McCoy, the Human Bomb. And we wanted the audience to believe that this character actually existed. So we put in the program, Sylvester McCoy played by Sylvester McCoy, and invented a complete resume for him. How he left an grammar school at 15 and went to India to study with gurus, and then to all these amazing stunts that we picked up. Where we picked up the stunts was we were asked to do a circus once called Hurst Carivari in a great tent in Southport. And we arrived, we were going to do the clown element, and this was very advanced circus, which has now become quite common really, with no animals, and there was going to be an orchestra playing music composed by Visconti, was it? Or who? Fellini. He composed for his clowns film, and there were going to be great new kind of young acts doing spectacular things in the circus. But no one else turned up except us, so in a fortnight we had to learn how to become a circus, so we learned lots of stunts. It was a dreadful circus, but it was we used it to great success in the roadshow.
So Sylvester McCoy is actually a fiction of the Roadshow. It was made up for the Roadshow, but it was spelt differently.
It didn't have the R on it. It was
Sylvester then.
Sylvester. But the reason why I stuck the R on is because some places they would stick the R on, some places they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And then I was doing a play about Stan Laurel, of Laurel and Hardy fame, and his original name was Stan Jefferson, and that had 13 letters in it, and he changed his name, or his girlfriend had passed, told him to change it to Stan Laurel, and his career completely changed.
So you felt that it was dangerous.
I just thought, well, there's no harm in trying.
Right.
But sometimes they take an R on, sometimes they don't, so I may as well define it. Here I am, Doctor Who.
Yes, but you'd accepted this thing, then you'd become somebody else, really, had you?
Well, yeah.
Did it feel like that? Because having moved from being a priest and being then somebody upright in the city and hating the position, being told to be upright, and you hated that position. So.
Yes, I was more a trainee alcoholic than a trainee executive. I wasn't upright at all. The opposite.
So you must have felt that you didn't fit in properly. You had to find a niche for yourself, and this niche of being an anarchic actor was one that you felt quite happy with.
Well, yes and no. It wasn't even the thing of finding not belonging. I didn't belong in the city right now. No, it was the reason why I took the name was in a sense. At the time, it was along the lines like there were painters and artists at the time who would paint the paintings and then set them on fire. You know, that philosophy. And in a way that I, as an actor, didn't matter who I was. I was an actor, that's all that mattered really. So therefore taking another name, losing my own identity in that way, it wasn't that important. The important thing was the job, the performance. In my own private life I was Kent Smith, and that, you know, in a public life I was whatever name you wanted to give to me really, because that wasn't important. What was important was the performance that evening.
Yes. But Sylvester McCoy is the name that you got, and
yes, and I'm very happy with it. I'm glad. I mean, now I don't think that way now. I'm quite happy to have it. I also like to have this. I mean, in a sense, I regret even telling you my real name, but I know it's been published somewhere. I mean, I quite like the fact that
secret.
There was, you know, that there was a secret, and you know that it was private. But I know it has been published. It's so ridiculous being coy about it or being McCoy about it.
So how did you go from Ken Campbell? That's a very specific form of theatre, very different from most of the theatre around, especially at the time.
Then people didn't think, but now it's quite an accepted part of theatre, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
Because Ken was very influential, or we were very influential, in revolutioning that, in the whole revolution of that. Because, I mean, street theatre was reborn again. I mean, there was street theatre before, but it died out, and it's reborn again, partly because of that. There's a lot to be proud of because of that, and various other forms of anarchistic theatre.
But it's certainly not the normal route.
No, and then I mean, how I got slowly into the normal route was we were touring in Germany. We'd become known as the Beatles of the theatre of Germany. Very big. We used to go there, earn lots of money, come back here, starve. While still working, we'd work here all the time, but pay pittance. But then we came back and we had a few weeks off. We thought we'd go and busk outside Joe Littlewood's theatre. Stratford Theatre or Stratford East. They were doing a revival of The Hostage, the first revival of The Hostage, and we went down there and busked. And Joan used to come out and watch us, thought we were wonderful, throw pound notes at us, pound notes, yes, in those days, and she thought this was great. And then one day she came out and said, "Come on, dolls, don't do it out here in the rain, come and do it on the stage." So she brought us in, we stuck us on the stage in front of there's a curtain out for The Hostage. Much to the annoyance of the actors, because we used to be really upset. We'd go out there and get all those laughs before they arrived, but we were warming up the audience. Joan knew what she was doing. And then after we went off back on tour again, and then one day I got a phone call from her saying, "Hey doll, would you like to come and do this play?" And I came along, and it was a very visual part, with some lines, but then she started improvising, and she suddenly realised that I could verbally respond as well as visually. She said, you can talk as well." So she gave me lots of wordy bits.
That was your first touch with legitimate theatre, I suppose. At least you had a stage and you were playing to an ordinary audience, and you had words as well. You still, nevertheless, have retained that visual element, haven't you? You're a very visual actor,
yeah,
I think.
Yes, I am. I mean, I regret that I didn't come an actor until I was 27, because I wished, in a way, I'd known I had these things. I didn't know it. I mean, wandering around ignorant of the fact I was carrying this bag of tricks. It would have been nice to have started younger.
Talking about tricks, you learnt a lot of tricks with Ken Campbell.
Yeah, the group all played various musical instruments, and I thought, I've got to learn something just quickly to join in with this. And I don't know why I came up with the spoons, but I did. But yes, and I've carried on learning tricks. When I was doing Doctor Who recently, it was written in because they thought I could do all sorts of things, juggling. And I said, well, I don't juggle. They said, but you look like a juggler. So I taught myself how to juggle just for Doctor Who, which is, and I think I'm quite proud of that. At 40 I was learning how to juggle, because it's much more difficult when you're older to learn these things than to learn them when you're younger.
What happened after Joan Littlewood?
Well, after Joan Littlewood, I ended up working for Richard Eyre at Nottingham Playhouse, because Richard took up the Ken Campbell Road show as well, and he employed us as a group for Bartholomew Fair to play the fairground people, which was a brilliant idea. It worked so wonderfully well. It was a great hit, that Bartholomew Fair we did, the Nottingham Festival. I can't remember the date. It was right in the middle of a heat wave, and it was packed. And we used to look out in the audience and see the audience fanning themselves. I'll never forget this image of all the audience fanning themselves with the programmes. And from that I stayed on and did other shows, lots of other shows. Ken Campbell wrote a musical called Walking Like Geoffrey. I played Geoffrey, who was the village idiot. It was based on a tale where in the medieval town the taxman had come to a village near Nottingham to collect tax and hadn't taxed the village idiot. So the next year the whole village decided they were all village idiots and to dodge paying tax. True story. And he put that in a musical, and I played the village idiot. And then I went on to play Seven and Two Masters, which was a big success. Then came down to London, to the Windmill. Oh no, not the Windmill, sadly. Wimbledon. And then I carried on, yeah.
And you carried on for what, 10 years, 15 years?
I've now been an actor for 18 years.
18 years. So it must have been a bit galling when 3 years ago, was it, you became Doctor Who, 4 years ago, and the press did what they normally do for people who haven't starred in international films or been on a long-running English soap or sitcom. They say this unknown actor is playing the Seventh Doctor.
Well, yes, I know it was, but as I'd realised this happened to everyone else that comes along, and so I just made me laugh, really. Just made me laugh at their ignorance. Really.
Did it make you feel slightly defensive? Did it make you feel when people asked you about what you'd done that you wanted to explain that, you know, how long you'd been doing it?
Well, yes, what I used to do was just a shrug, really. You listen, you mustn't believe everything you read in the newspapers, and especially, you know, the kind of British newspapers. Not, some of them anyway. I just thought it's ridiculous. I mean, I wisecracked. I mean, I'd also been on television a hell of a lot before that as well. I mean, I'd spent 12 years up to that point of every year doing a series on television. I mean, I'd been a very experienced television worker. But because most of it had taken place in the children's era of television, my wisecrack was that television critics only watched television in the local pub, and so the pubs weren't open when children's television was on, so they never realised that even children's television existed. And that's why they said those things. But what I tried not to do desperately was to actually pay attention to it, because it can be very difficult for a person to. I mean, I remember when the various other doctors took over that they said nearly the exact same things. Who is this person? Tom Baker. Who is Tom Baker? He's not as good as the last one. We want the last one. And then I realised that this would change. And I had every confidence. Funnily enough, I've always been, never professed to have confidence in myself. But I had every confidence that I could actually play the role of Doctor Who. And I knew that I would win out. I mean, I thought, yeah, let them say that, because they'll change the tune. I've never been so cocky about anything before. And I've never admitted to it anyway. But they have changed the tune, I know, slowly. I mean, I think another series and I would have them completely won over.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just the independent run, it's a very good doctor, very successful. They've changed. But then they've just and they'll do the exact same thing to the next one, unless he's a very well-known face. But then they'll knock him because he's a well-known face. Do you know what I mean? They do this. That's what they like to do.
Did you have a feeling then of fulfillment, that you actually got something that would fulfill you as an actor, but also fulfill you in ambition terms? Because you suddenly got this national institution to take on.
Well, yes.
You're known because of that.
Yes, I know. Well, in a way, what I liked about the role of Doctor Who was I saw that it could fulfill, or I could put into it most of the experience I've had in acting. From classical acting to street acting in a way, because Doctor Who is a very, very, it's a role where you can fit in an awful lot of things and facets to the character. And on television terms, I thought it was, because television is very restricting really in acting, that it was, you know, one of the classical roles in both sense of the word, where you can give a great deal of depth and height and width to, whereas if you're a soap opera star, you can't. I have been very lucky in many times because my acting career in television had popped up in various different types of roles. But this one, I felt you could put all those various different types of roles into the one character. So that was one of the great excitements about doing it. Coming an national institution, you mentioned.
Yeah.
I haven't really enjoyed that. Because I think I'm a bit like Patrick Trout. I mean, he left because of that. And I think if I leave, it would be almost like because of that. I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy, in a way, it's a bit like being a mini royal. I don't mean that in any respect to royalty or not. Although I'm not a great authority figure person, and for that reason, I don't enjoy that. I don't like being respected.
Is it a bit like not being able to take your jacket off when it's very hot? You get stuck with the role.
Yeah, in a way, it's like that. In a sense it's like.
It's also a great responsibility. I know that I'm working with you here, and I see the amount of fan mail that you have to pick up every day, and you're very good about it. You open it all, you read it, and you have to make decisions about what to do about it. But obviously, people make too many demands on actors in your position. They do it out of all sincerity. They want to meet this celebrity. They want their children to meet them.
They want to heart-rending, give them tea.
Yes, they make heart-rending appeals as well. And it's very difficult for somebody who's as obviously compassionate as you are to turn down those requests. And yet, for you to have any kind of life at all, especially when you're doing 2 shows a day, you've got to make choices.
Yes, and I do find that very, very difficult. The other day someone came to me and they said, would I have tea with them? And I had tea with them, and in a very busy life. And then again they came back and said, would I have 5 more minutes the next day with them? And it got to the point where you have to say, well, I can't really. I've got to really do the job that I've been employed to do. I also need some rest to do that job because it's a very energetic job, and I've got all these other things that people want me to do. I do find that very difficult. I find it very difficult to say no to anyone, and so that's that's sometimes the case. And I get very tired sometimes trying to do it, and then get a bit angry, and then get very angry at myself. And so I prefer really to be anonymous. I wish I had. If I was starting all over again as Doctor Who, I wouldn't have let anyone know my real name. I would have created a complete secret area.
But it's too late.
It's too late, really, isn't it? Yes, it's too late now. But it's just. That's the one thing I've got against the job is that side of it. I find it, being a national institution, very, very odd. And like other national institutions, like the Royal Family or whoever, they have lots of help. You're just chucked into this totally untrained. The BBC didn't even tell me how to hold a press conference, and you have to become a politician suddenly. It's very, it's like you have to watch what you say. And of course, being half Irish, it's very difficult to watch what I say. And also being a bit of an anarchist. I do want to,
This word anarchy has come up several times.
Yes, it's the small A. I'm not one of those ones that go with.
You're a natural anarchist, it seems to me. In fact, I wrote down 3 words when I was thinking about how you came across. Anarchy was the first word I thought of. Energy was the second word, and comedy was the third. Playing the Doctor, it seems to me, in what I've seen you do, what is very important is not just that light side, the fooling about, the comedy, but there's a very dark strand as well. Is this part of you, the sad face of the clown? Is the smile really just painted on?
Well, yes, I mean, I suppose in a way, because I wanted to bring that darkness back into Doctor Who, away from my first season, which wasn't so dark. But yes, there is, in a way. I mean, obviously, every clown is angry at the world for many reasons, because there's lots of reasons to be angry. And I mean, I always saw Doctor Who as an anti-authority figure anyway. I mean, from Patrick Troughton as the first Doctor, I remember seeing, and he had a strong effect. I mean, he had a strong effect on all of my friends at the time, as I suppose perhaps I'm having on a new generation.
You were late teens, early 20s?
No, I was 20s,
early
yes,
20s.
my 20s. I was in
But you watched Doctor Who?
And I watched Doctor Who then, and we used to watch it regularly after trying to see if we won the polls. He's come to fight injustice.
Yes. It's an experiment.
In a very intelligent way, not like injustice like in the American super men way. I mean,
He's an ordinary person, isn't he?
He's a person, but yes, and he does it with his brain. In a way, he's been created by the people who obviously watch him and need him, and the writers. I mean, they all feed each other, really. He's in a sense like an uncle or a grandfather figure, or a father figure, but a good one. I think he's not a father so much. He comes from outside, but he's more like an uncle who comes and puts right the wrongs.
We started out literally as a grandfather,
Yeah.
didn't he? We saw him as a grandfather, and there's that in the way that the myth goes on. You are that character as well as being Patrick Troughton.
Yes, exactly.
But physically, you're very close, I suppose, to Patrick Troughton.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed all the other. I mean, John Pertwee, I thought wonderful too, and Tom Baker. And I stopped watching halfway through Tom Baker because I'd become an actor by then, and there were no VCRs, and of course you got out of the habit of watching, serials and series, because you'd always miss the punchline. But it had a great effect, Doctor Who, on me then, and us, little bunch of people who used to watch it. He was very much in tune with the times then. I'm not sure. I hope I'm in tune with the times now.
So the real McCoy has this concern for the injustices in the world, as well as a feeling of being against authority. I mean, that's what the real McCoy is about.
Yes, I suppose in a way. I'm angry at the state of the world. I'm angry at the injustices in the world, and therefore I can't actually. I'm also angry at the fact I can't do anything about it. But now that I'm in Doctor Who, I can play that anger in the character, because I see him as. I mean, that was another attraction to the role, because it was like he is that type of man.